Today I'll talk about two of the most common terms in web development, front-end and back-end. Very often we talk about these terms, but let's take a look at what do they actually mean. Front-end code means any code that is executed or ran in the user's browser. Let's look at an example. Imagine a user types netflix.com in Google Chrome and the web page loads in their browser. All the UI elements composed of HTML and CSS are front-end code. Even some parts of basic user interactions, like pausing a video, muting a video, or clicking on a button are handled by front-end code. Most, if not all, front-end code is written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Backend code means any code that is executed in a server somewhere far from the user's browser. Think of a server as just a generic computer somewhere in the world. The backend code is running on this computer. The front-end code in the browser is communicated with this backend code through the network. Python, Java, C#, Golang, Rust, and many more are awesome languages to write backend code. As you can see here, there are two protocols the browser can use predominantly to communicate to the backend. One is HTTP, which is a one-directional communication, so only the browser can send a request to the server and the server sends a response back. And the other protocol is WebSockets, which is a two-way communication. So once the connection is established, the client and server both can send data to each other at will. For complex web applications like Netflix, Facebook, and Amazon, most of the logic is executed in the backend. Let's look at a few examples. Loading the video details, streaming video on demand, maintaining the user account information, generating personalized user content, adding videos to a user's custom list, and logging or tracking a user's movement around Netflix's page. As the user is moving around the website and interacting with it, the front-end code communicates with the backend through HTTP or WebSockets to execute all these actions. Now let's look at a couple of examples to make more sense out of it. Let's say you click on the My List button over here. Your initial interaction with the button is handled by the JavaScript in the front-end code. As you click that button, the front-end communicates with the backend to retrieve the list of movies that you added to the list. The logic of figuring out which movies to show lies in the backend. Once the backend figures out the list and sends it back to the front-end code figures out how to render the HTML and CSS to present the page to you. Let's look at another example now. Let's say you click on the home button over here and you land on the home page of Netflix, which is divided into multiple sections like popular on Netflix and trending now. The carousels are being rendered by the front-end code. However, actually retrieving the different lists and figuring out which movies to show in which sections are done by the backend. Hopefully these two examples give you a better idea about the distinction between front-end and backend. A common question is, why not do everything in the client then? Modern browsers are pretty powerful, so why not execute everything in the browser? There are multiple reasons for doing this separation. Let's go through a couple of them. Number one, most web applications will use some kind of a database. You need a server to talk to this database more cleanly and abstract away all these data-specific logic in the backend. Number two, even though browsers are powerful, a lot of the processing power depends on the user's machine. You don't want your complex calculations and operations to be dependent on the user's resources. You want to execute these in a deterministic environment, which is your server. Number three, all your front-end code is publicly visible. Your application might have some logic that you don't want to reveal to the outside world. Having those logic in the backend helps you protect that. And lastly, as your application grows, it's impossible to scale if you don't have your complex logic abstracted to a backend server. There are a couple other smaller reasons, such as separation of concern. You want one service to be responsible only for your front-end code and another service to be responsible for your backend code. That brings in easier deployment too. So when you want to make some small changes to your HTML or CSS, you can just deploy your front-end code. And when you have some backend changes to do, you can make those changes and deploy the code without touching the front end at all. Overall, as a rule of thumb, you should always separate your front-end code and backend code for best performance, reliability, and security. That's all from me today. Hopefully now you have a better idea about the difference between front-end and backend. If you like the content, please leave a like below and subscribe. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. See you all in the next video. Bye-bye.